try something as a little experiment. Evaluate, if it's expensive to do that, but if it's sufficiently safe, just do one little step just to try. You may look at some of the existing experiments I proposed. You can look into, again, at work or with your family, but just try something. In the end, what do you have to lose? That's all I say all the time. Try something. What do you have to lose? We agree on the problem. We may disagree on the option. How about you explore this one? What do you have to lose?
So good day and welcome to another episode of the Expander series. We bring you stories, inspiration and insights from IT leaders, digital leaders and change agents in and for mid-sized businesses around the globe. My name is Matthias Turken, and it's my absolute pleasure to today introduce you to Claudio Perrone. Claudio actually doesn't need much of an introduction in this group, I think, but just for our new viewers who should watch this at a later time, Claudio is a well-known lean and agile management consultant and entrepreneur and a startup strategist based in Dublin in Ireland. He is the creator of several methodologies like A3 Thinker and PopcornFlow. And his goal, as he always says, move fast, learn faster, and thrive under uncertainty. It's with this background that we are then also today talking about or chatting to each other about PopcornFlow Stealth. And that is about how to fight organizational inertia from the shadows. Claudio, I'm really excited that you've agreed to share some of your insights and chat to us about it. But without further ado, I want to hand over to you to give us a bit of an introduction first. So all over to you.
Thank you so much, and really glad to be here. I was really pushed to do this because you don't talk about PopcornFlow Stealth. That's the first rule of PopcornFlow Stealth, right? So anyway, I actually have a presentation that I want to show you, okay? And it's the first time I show it to anybody, so you're going to be my guinea pigs, really. And let's start. And in many ways it's not finished. It's just abandoned for today. So, okay, this conversation started, actually in our network, we had a few of these conversations. How do you introduce change in your organization? And so I write it down. More specifically, there was this idea of how do you influence a larger and less dynamic traditional organization? So, well, I need options. So let's pretend I'm on a mastermind. I'm a hot seat. That's my question. Okay, I have that problem. So the first option I had in mind was Mother Nature. Essentially, you do nothing. You let them die. They go into, they retire, whatever. Now, this is an option. Sometimes actually it happens. They isolate people. But it's not very coherent with influence a large and less dynamic traditional organization, not if everybody's like that. And it takes a lot of time. I mean, Mother Nature is the greatest invention ever, right? To die, because a lot of ideas, old ideas die with them. And that's how some people actually think about change. Then, of course, we have the top-down transformations. These are loud, top-down. Usually they start with some pilots, and then they go all in. Unless you're in Italy, we usually start with all in, and then we recover afterwards. Typically, not all the time, there's the carrot and stick kind of strategy. That's where a lot of change management, traditional change management ideas also come from, because you have like a project, point A to point B. Point B is fixed. Now you need to pretty much convince everybody that point B is a good idea, and otherwise it's trouble, okay? And in that sense, what you have is a lot of change recipients. I mean, it's not that doesn't happen, it happens all the time. Then, of course, you use influence, logos, pathos, ethos. Ethos is who you are. If Bill Gates came over to your company to explain how blah, 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 chances are somebody would actually follow. And if it's not Bill Gates, it's Steve Jobs or somebody else anyway. So it's who you are. In fact, they say that some of the stupidest ideas really need a PhD to be brought forward. Otherwise, nobody would believe them. Then you have pathos, which is you tell stories and, you involve people in that way. And logos is you use the logic. you know, a long time ago I learned the fact that I'm right and you're wrong doesn't mean you're going to follow whatever I say. Okay, so you use stories and you wrap information and facts around different things. So it's about, you know, people generally change by inspiration or desperation, they say. And this can happen at both levels, like bottom up and top down. Then, of course, there is a right time to introduce change. You know, John F. Kennedy says the time to repair the roof is when the sun is shining, and which is great. I respectively say that also the time, though, to sell umbrella is when it's raining. So, you know, it's never about time, and it's always about time. You know, there's always time to introduce change. Then, of course, you have bottom up. That's when things start organically with a team or a local authority. It bubbles up, creates momentum. If leadership is receptive, this is how you build it up. And a lot of people really believe in bottom up. I certainly believe in a bottom up. The risk is if leadership does not understand that, it remains isolated. Okay, but this is how, like a lot of organizations I worked with, some of them actually are some of the fastest growing startups in the history of the internet, actually developed. You know, they are organic. We go there, we copy their models and whatever. What we don't understand is that they actually grew organically like that. They had time to do this, right? Or I was a CTO like tons of years ago. I developed a system, right, where people effectively would grow in and would find an environment that was suitable essentially for growth. And so they would just copy, you know, copy good behavior. Then, by the way, all of these options that I'm giving you, just to talk about them, I tried them all. It's not something I read. These are stuff I tried. I'm sure there's a lot more. This is what I would call Geronimo, you know, the Apache sort of, you burn the ground around people. So I would highlight, this happened, for example, in one organization. I highlighted a common problem. Everybody was busy. So I said, are you too busy? Here's maybe I have some solution or some idea that could help. You have more stuff than you can actually do. And so in that sense, I did actually a presentation about Kanban. And I said, by the way, the CIO is coming. There was a lot of people coming. So I said, well, I'm a consultant. I'm here only 5 weeks. I'm paid anyway, but if you need help, I can help. I'm here available to you. And essentially I worked with all the teams that actually needed and wanted help, sought my help. And then I surrounded there was one team in particular where, you know, there were kind of rock stars and whatever, they wouldn't ask for help until the team lead came to me, because they could see that everybody else was having fun, being very productive, and it would come to me and say, I actually don't know what my team is doing, can you help? And so we started an implementation. Now I'm talking about like 2009 was one of the first common implementations. So I call it Geronimo, because you're essentially ignoring the person and just going around them, or the team and going around them. Another one, which is a little bit harsher, but I've seen that as well, is you send them in vacation or on holiday. You wait for them to go on a holiday, you change their team, and when they're back, either don't have a team or the dynamics are changed. I've seen that. You know, I'm not saying I recommend that, but sometimes, you know, if people don't have the right mindset, you know, you need time away to actually build the system and wait. The other one is absorbing core. That's what I call. I can't tell where I used it, but I used it and it worked really well. And essentially what you do is you create a team, which is not an innovation team, is a development team that actually use innovation, modality, capabilities, systems, and whatever. Now, the risk is that they remain isolated. Instead, what you do is you begin to recruit from inside the organization on the more static teams, if you want. So you recruit, you expand, so you break them up, you split them, right? But essentially, you create that kind of culture where you first create the system with a new methodology, build people in, they get used to that. We're powerfully influenced by the environment around us. And so then you split and you begin to share, essentially. And this is how you disrupt pretty much your internal culture. Essentially, is using theory of disruption that you would normally use, where you go under the radar on innovation, right? And whether you're under the radar until something kicks in. Like in this case, that's what you do, is you protect the team, it's under the radar, but they take more and more projects, they become more and more efficient, more effective, people take notice, you recruit inside, and then you split. It's an awesome way to look at it. Another one is problem solving and then coaching. So for example, I would have done something like that where we work with a team, solve a problem, but in a very visible way. I would share the results and the method that I actually used. That would create curiosity. I worked with managers who were curious. I would say, how about we pair problem solving together? And so in this case, we would be peers on problem solving. And after a while, after some of these problems, we would actually switch roles. So I'm the sensei, the mentor, and he's the problem solver. He or she is the problem solver. So his job is to solve problems, my job is to develop them, right? And by switching this kind of role, what you do is you create allies, right? Because you build problem solvers, and they do the same then with others who normally would moan and do whatever. You actually say, how about we try to address this problem together? So that's another way to expand. This is actually the Toyota way. Then the other one is PopcornFlow. And PopcornFlow is a way to introduce, sustain, and accelerate change. It creates a learning stream, is like a system where effectively you create a habit of change, right? Now, some of you who are listening to PopcornFlow for the first time, I guess, maybe wonder, I don't know anything about PopcornFlow. And so I would say, if you don't, perhaps you could have a look at the other video, the expander video that we did like a while ago, that actually shows and introduces PopcornFlow. There's a great Q&A, Matthias, like I love that Q&A actually that we did afterwards. And so, you know, let's write it down. I could say, let's watch the PopcornFlow expander video. Now, I think you love it. Why would you want to do it? Because it's a way to fight inertia. Maybe it could help you. So maybe you could see if and how PopcornFlow can do so. So my expectation is that you love it, you want to find out more, and maybe you even want to try it right away. Okay, so as you see, it's a little experiment. And the duration is 1 hour, okay? It doesn't take long pretty much to do this. So in any case, here's a quick summary. So PopcornFlow captures a pragmatic anti-fragile philosophy. What it means, it doesn't matter. There are principles. It's based on this observation, is that inertia is our enemy. If change is hard, make it continuous. It's not only what to do, but also what to learn by doing it that matters. Everybody's entitled to their own opinion, but a shared opinion is a fact. It's not fail fast, fail often. It's learn fast, learn often. And I captured the last principle that I didn't have in the other video, which is this one, effectively. Small bets, big payoff. And it's the idea that I could have a lot of cheap experiments, like the one about just watch the expander video, which is a limited cost. It's just an hour of investment, but then the payoff may be huge, right? Because you may find out that that method really addresses a lot of the problems that you currently have, or it may change your career or whatever. So it turns out you could do 10 experiments, fail all 10, but the 11th one is the one that actually changes your career. I would still do it. And then, of course, there's a 7-step decision cycle: problems and observations, options, possible experiments, committed, ongoing, review. Next, the beginning of each makes the word popcorn, hence the name PopcornFlow. So PopcornFlow actually is a thing. And it turns out, you know, again, you can put those steps in a board. Oh, that sounds familiar, because I blew my cover, okay? If you didn't know anything about PopcornFlow, what we just did before was pretty much to have a problem. We discussed some options. I proposed an experiment, which you may commit to do or not. But effectively, I use PopcornFlow, or the mechanics of PopcornFlow, without having to explain, you know, the principles behind the philosophy and whatever. I just did it. This is how I do it. This is how PopcornFlow stealth essentially works. You just do it in every situation where it's worth not to introduce PopcornFlow first for a number of reasons, and you just work with the steps, and you facilitate, and you say, I see the problem this way. Do you agree? Okay, so here we go. PopcornFlow stealth. So with a normal PopcornFlow, you know, there could be training. You introduce it actually as an experiment. Usually I integrate into existing initiatives anyway, or existing, you know, approaches that the team may have. But with PopcornFlow Stealth, essentially what I do is systematically, I introduce the steps. I use whatever system is already there. If it's an Agile team, I use Agile retrospectives. If it's some meeting where some shared opinion, some discussion and some options, are, or you want to create options, I guess, and involve people, then I would literally go on a board and actually say, I see the problem this way. Do you agree? What options do we have based on that? Or what problems do you have? So the way it works is really like you facilitate any decision with peers, reports, your boss, your family, and then you come out, but only within your group, your tribe. You don't come out outside that if it's not safe. So if I have a team or a division, I may explain PopcornFlow. I can do courses and whatever if needed. But you don't go outside, right? You stay stealth. Staying stealth means you use PopcornFlow, you just do not explain that is a thing. Why? Because they may resist it, okay? So you just use it as a way to facilitate. And when I realized that PopcornFlow wasn't a geeky thing, was actually a way to structure decisions and having a conversation, I started actually using options and experiments all the time. You don't like the word experiment, call it small step. How can we explore this and whatever, right? So that's the idea. So why stealth? Because the front door is closed. You may not have the authority to introduce like a system. You may have, it's a low trust environment. I'll give you an example. My son yesterday actually asked, Daddy, when are you going to introduce PopcornFlow in my class? Well, it turns out schools are, or at least that school, doesn't trust much people from the outside, for obvious reasons. You don't want like adults pretty much going into the class and blah, blah, blah. So in order to get there, he would need to convince his teacher. Then actually the vice principal already knows about PopcornFlow, but she doesn't know that. But you know what I mean? Like for me to go there and explain PopcornFlow, it would be actually hard. So what he can do instead is to, rather than having him even to introduce PopcornFlow, is to actually use PopcornFlow Stealth, right? To introduce, as he faces problems, to actually discuss options and make it as a de facto way they begin to introduce change. And then opens the cover, right? When the time is right. So if the introduction is not safe to fail, control freaks may freak out. I got a guy saying, oh, I see this board. Who's the god behind it? Who is responsible for deciding which experiments you can do? And of course, it's anti-agile, right? You want autonomous teams. But anyways, continuous change is scary. The first time I talked about continuous change, they loved the idea of experimentation. When I actually said, well, I work with teams and some of them generated 10 experiments a week. That's scary. They begin to think, oh, wow, did you agree with this? Wait a second. And I said, but, even one a week is fine. But anyways, the concept of continuous change needs to be understood, right? The word experiment, so I call it step. People fear any new system. You don't have the authority. Problem is urgent. And you want to just start with the problem, not explain a system around that. You may fear they may not like it. You want to avoid the bureaucracy, like the school example I was explaining. You don't want to challenge the status quo like right away. It may conflict with other initiatives. People, they hear about, oh, like a system to introduce innovation. I'm the innovation lead. It happens. They already are scared until you do maybe something that convinces them otherwise. I don't want to take chances. So how could we explore PopcornFlow Stealth? Well, you could do like a little example. So for example, the family, right? I don't know if you would go to the family and say, here's the method and here are the principles and blah, blah, blah. I've done it with my son mechanically first when he was 5. Now he's beginning to appreciate other things, but generally wise, you wouldn't do that. So here's maybe an example of a little experiment on how to try it with your family. Maybe you can decide to cook a brand new dish this weekend. If you can't cook, it's even better. Okay, if you know that you can cook, it's even better. The point here is why we want to do that. Well, you want to treat your family, you want to play with your family, and you want to practice PopcornFlow Stealth. It's just an idea, of course, right? It's a possible experiment. I'm not forcing anyone to do it, but just as an example. And so my expectation is that the family will help you out. Choose the dish. Maybe you can give them options of what you have in mind, or maybe take a book, but, try to do something that you've never done before. And maybe they will help you, to do the groceries and, whatever, and maybe to cook as well. The thing, though, is that I would expect that the family will enjoy the result, even if it's all burned. It's just fun. And the duration is 1 day, which means, a day after you can review this, and or even a few hours after. What did you learn? Maybe it was a fun time with the family, but actually you also tried PopcornFlow, the mechanics of PopcornFlow, without having to introduce it. Another way could be on your next mastermind. I'm just throwing ideas here, right? Why? Because you want to practice it in a safe environment. I understand that you are with friendly strangers who are not strangers anymore, I guess. But if you did, you may consider the fact that I actually present this as I'm a hot seat, here's my problem, and I'm buying options. That's exactly what I'm doing from my peers, right? Is to get options from everybody. And at the end of that, you may decide either right on the spot or during the week that maybe you want to explore one of those options, have an experiment, and maybe just see the results, review the results at the next mastermind. That's one way you can consider doing something like that. So as you see, every time you get together with somebody, you need to take decisions, buy and trade options. It might actually be a decent idea to just use that as a mechanism without explaining everything, without calling, an expert to actually do that. To be good at PopcornFlow, it needs one person, not the whole team. It's one person, and it's you. Not the whole company. It's one person, and it's you. So personally, I committed to the cooking one. I will chat about it actually at the next mastermind, I guess, and just for fun. And just a couple of extra things, and then I will conclude. When you hack into a system, and you find entry points, the weak points. I leverage their problems, not mine. The system is your company. If the company is not like Spotify or other companies I work with, they will violently resist if you're not careful. So I consider that a system, and I enter their weak points. What are the weak points? Well, any company I know has got problems around these, right? It might be that you have slightly different problems at team level, depending on the kind of maybe role you have. You have different problems, but there's over and over, I see recurring patterns and, stuff like that. And so that's how I enter with PopcornFlow. It's not the solution, it's their problems. So my problems is their problems. Problems, hopefully, I agree with, okay? And the question then is, who should solve problems, though? Well, we have options. I love options, as you see. So experts could solve problems. Everybody solves problems. Experts improve whole systems. I talked about systems already a couple of times. And everybody improves whole systems. And it turns out this is our understanding of learning organizations through time. This is in the US. In Japan, it happened a little bit earlier. But essentially, in the industrialization times, you had the thinkers and the doers. They were separated. That was the experts solving problems. Then in the 50s, theory X, theory Y, essentially you had this idea that, theory X means people don't want to work and they're lazy, so you need to be there with a gun, otherwise they won't do anything. Theory Y means people actually want to do good. They won't be put in a position, essentially, to do well. And so you help them. And that's when you create, like, teams and cross-functional teams and whatever. Then you have, like, I don't know, black belts, where you have the lean experts and blah, blah, blah. They start thinking that not all problems are the same. They are the outcome of certain systems. And so you act on the system. Now, for the ones who actually know about flow, Kanban, and whatever, you will appreciate that the battle here is not about individual problems, it's about systems. Because it doesn't matter how or less productive somebody is, if they are in a waterfall system or in a stage gate system, they're bound to be slower than a small batch Toyota style pool system. Okay, so it's a battle of systems. If you actually use a different model, you're actually acting in a different way, you're bound to be faster, okay? And there are ways to demonstrate that. It's Q in theory. This is what Toyota did pretty much. It's not that they are faster than the guys in Ford. They just have a better system. They had a better system, okay? So systems thinking is important. Now, Gartner, 2018 CIO survey. This is thanks to Mark. He published that for everybody actually to see. What's the biggest barrier to scaling digital transformation? 46% said culture, which is interesting but useless. Culture comes for free. The old model of thinking was the culture, you know, based on a certain culture, you create or explicit, you have certain values and certain attitudes which affect what you do. In reality, if you want to hack a system, what you do is you hack on what you do first, which affects the values and the attitudes, which then affects the culture. The culture is a mirror or the actions you do. You start from the action, and that's why I start with PopcornFlow. You know, you want to create a learning organization, I create the behavior where people learn, right? There's no other. That's why you do it. So it's not about just solving problems. It's introducing a system that helps you solve problems or learn. Okay, so you act the other way around. Put it another way, behavior changes perspective, which impacts the mindset, which in turn affects the behavior, and it's a kind of a circle. So the final thought is, if you want to be faster, you learn to learn faster, and it's not only what you do, but also what you learn by doing it that matters. With this, thank you. And I hope you liked it. And that's pretty much it for me.
I think then everybody can put on their cameras and we run it like we do in a normal mastermind. And that is, if you've got a question for Claudio, just unmute yourself and then I can see. I see a few people have not yet put on their cameras, but that's fine. We'll get there just now. There we go. We've got a few more.
And guys,
Great.
Thanks so much for being here. Like, it's awesome to be here.
Great. So then let's hear if anybody has directly got a question for you here. Nobody yet. Claudio, I wanted to see if you're looking at PopcornFlow and you say that the first thing is just introduce and start. So you're working the board on your own, and
yeah.
you're just showing people the experiments, or how would you do that?
No, so say for example you see there's a team that has got problems, and sometimes you're parachuted. I'm parachuted sometimes as a consultant into address how a team is working and blah blah blah, because they and only they have a problem. Of course, like there's a lot of issues and whatever, but often I try to get a pulse of the situation, and so I would say, okay, let's do perhaps a retrospective, right? You start reflecting on the situation so far. So I would go there in front of the whiteboard and actually say, create a column, call it problems or problems and observations or whatever, and say, okay, let's talk about the problems we have. And essentially you let them talk and you write down. And then you say, well, I think perhaps I can help on some of those things, but what you do then is you elicit the options, of course. So I follow the mechanics effectively of PopcornFlow without introducing PopcornFlow. They may not know who I am. It doesn't matter, right? As long as you manage to have a conversation with somebody. Now, one thing I do like is to write it down because it makes it very concise, makes it visual and very concise. I think this, to me, is kind of a key to the whole thing to work, right? Is to possibly have a board. I use cards sometimes. I actually just write a post-it on a table if I'm in a pub, like whatever. But when somebody actually has to write down on a post-it what the problem is, there's a lot less conversation that goes like on a tangent and more, if you had to nail it down to a problem, which one is it, right? And then you say, okay, based on that, what options do we have? Guys, do you have any options? The quality of the code sucks, okay? It's an opinion. We don't have to demonstrate it as long as we all agree with that. But, what options do we have? And sure, a lot of people may have options. And so I ask first and then eventually introduce mine, if I have some, right? And then we say, okay, how can we explore this? Can we do that? Can we explore it in an hour or two? So you're going through the mechanics without explaining PopcornFlow. Right? You really don't have to, because it's a coaching system effectively, right? You yourself become a mentor, a coach. You're just using that system to guide that conversation. Now, of course, you can't stay stealth forever, because Otherwise, well, there's two aspects, essentially. One is that if you only know the mechanics, you will always be a slave of the mechanics. If you know the principles, you will be able to choose whatever you want. And really what you want to do is to learn that culture, right, of continuous experimentation and whatever. But the other thing is that things actually spread more easily. You know, once it becomes a thing, it's not just you and the way you act. It becomes something that becomes a language, right? A pattern that we can use and reuse. So that's why you really don't want to be stealth all the time, but you need to be safe. And sometimes it's not safe. And it's not safe when people are really, really afraid of introducing something new. And if they're not the most responsible, most powerful person in the room, you know, there's a number of things that may go against it. But this is not just PopcornFlow, it's any system. But the cool thing about PopcornFlow is that you can actually do it without declaring anything and just do it as a way of conversation, because it is natural. You look at a lot of conversations out there, and a lot of people do create problems, do have problems, do share them. You know, in the worst case scenario, they tell what the solution is and they say, do it. But in the best situations, you know, what you have is you involve the team, you sell, right? Whatever problem you have. So it's also finding different situations where you would do this. So, you know, what examples I give are, I could do this with my peers. I could do this with my family. I'm doing this with my kids. I can do this with my boss. Yeah, I go to the boss and say, I see the problem this way. I'm thinking about this option. Is there any other option that I haven't considered or that you may consider? So you involve them, right? It's a co-designing of moving forward. Now, again, you don't go there and say, I have this cool PopcornFlow solution. Remember, my entry points, the weak point of the system is the problems, not the solutions, right? You go there with the problems where your expectation is that they see it the way you see it, or at least you can see it, you know, you can work it out so that you can, you know, at some point you can convene, you can agree that this is a problem worth solving and maybe we could do something about it now, right? So it's find your entry point. It's a decision cycle. Life is made of decisions. So there's tons of them. And just have a structure mechanism to also mentor and coach others. The trick is the switch out, right? When you come out, what do you do? So if you're an IT manager and you're in control of the IT, then it's easy enough, like to, you know, you can do a number of things. You can, but you can be way more open, right? Usually the jump then is when you go outside, right? Outside your team or outside your group, then what do you do? So you begin by doing the mechanics first. You get them used to it, and then eventually you introduce it as a thing.
Thanks, Claudio. I guess others have got questions also, not only me. So I'll open the floor, or I have opened the floor, but I'm sure that you've got the person who's put PopcornFlow together here on the line. You won't have that often. So who's got something for Claudio?
Jason.
Jason, yes.
Yeah, hey, thanks, Claudio. Nice to be talking with you.
Yes.
Can you share a story of maybe a time you've seen this be the most successful, where you've seen the most, say, cultural change happen in an organization?
Yeah, I mean, the first company, I actually use it. I have a testimonial of, this is a startup now, okay? So it's not a huge company. But, I mean, they now have 200 people, I think. Now, their revenue improved by a factor 10. I have the CEO stating that. Factor 10. So this is what we're talking about. We're not talking about some geeky stuff around blah, 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 which I do all the time. It's more actually, this actually impacts the system, the way people act and whatever. And I started with the team, distributed team. We had hundreds of experiments after months, but literally hundreds of experiments. And this affected pretty much everybody. In fact, the ones who were resisting the change are the ones who are no longer here. no longer there. Not because they were kicked out, but because they found themselves less of a hero. It was more like about like the system and the teams and the way they were reasoning became a lot more. So like the continuous improvement and continuous change that came out of that created the real heroes, not the firefighters, not the ones who, you know, fix a problem here and there. They find themselves like busy, but in busyness, you know. I'm not saying that they're not helpful. They are helpful, but they're visible, you know, in the hard times. And so because of that, they are the only visible people. But the ones who actually prevent problems to happen, they're always under the radar. What you do with PopcornFlow, particularly not when you're stealth, but when you come out, is that the real heroes come out because those boards are visible. People can see them, can see how people reason. I often call managers to actually show this is what people are doing, right? So the impact can be really big. But having said that, I mean, there are, you know, this PopcornFlow is actually spreading in a couple of really large banks right now. In Canada, there's somebody from Canada, right? Who's from Canada? You're from Canada. That's right, Jason. It's awesome to talk to you face to face, by the way, you know, always through the network. Well, in Canada, apparently somebody has been working to improve the life of Canadian citizens and won 2 innovation awards because of that. I worked with 16 different agencies in the public sector. I mean, we can take it offline and talk about that. But again, you know, the ones who actually won these awards, you know, they give credit to PopcornFlow for doing that. And so it's private sector as well as public sector, which is awesome. The first time I worked with the public sector, I said, well, you know, I had this quick workshop that we did in Dubai sometime, like, and there were 120 people. There's roughly 120 people here in Canada, and, you know, it was a lean workshop we did about PopcornFlow. And, you know, in Dubai, they generated 55 experiments and committed to 33 in 1 hour and a half. Now, I did introduce it before, and then we did this thing, which was awesome, right? The global CTO came to me, hugging me and say, it was epic. That was in Dubai, private sector, regional CTOs coming from all over the world. Then when I went to Canada, I worked with these 16 different agencies, about 120 people. Again, keynotes, an hour and a half. Now, normally I do like full day workshops and whatever, but that's what we did in that particular case. And I said to them, well, in Dubai, they generated 55 experiments, committed to 33 starting on Monday, okay? But they're private sector, you're public. So I expect you're going to generate 56 experiments and commit to 34, one more. So we all laughed, and at the end of that, they generated 97 experiments, committed to 65, right? I got 80-something testimonials, all glowing and whatever. But that's beyond the point. The point was that if you give people the opportunity to actually to talk about the problems they have with other peers and whatever, and you give them a system to do something about it, it doesn't matter how big or small it is, because this is not problem solving as in lean problem solving. Like in lean problem solving, you have a gap between an expectation and reality. You know, you do root cause analysis, you neutralize the causes, and effectively with countermeasures. And yes, there are experiments, but it takes longer. And there is one assumption, which is I have a broken part and I can analyze to find where the cause is. But in a lot of complex systems, you can't find causes, right? Because what's the cause that you're saying no to me? That's your reaction to change, to whatever. And because today you woke up, you know, and you didn't sleep much, you know, like it doesn't matter. What it does matter is, based on the problem that we have in front, what options do we have? What decisions can we do? Because we're not in a complicated domain where you can use, you know, Toyota kind of style of analysis. We're in the complex domain, which involves people. So, you know, as I always say, if you are, you know, if something breaks down, you use analysis. But if you're in the middle of a jungle, you use complexity stuff. You explore, right? You probe, right? And this is what we're doing. Those problems are not problems. They're probes, okay? We're probing. I'm saying I think that, you know, I don't know, you could have a hard time to introduce change in the organization, right? Do you agree with that? Or it's hard. Do you agree with that? Okay, what options do we have? Let's talk about that. You know, it doesn't mean that at the end of this, you address the problem completely. But what often means, particularly if you need to involve the people who are part of the problem, I guess, or the solution of the problem when you involve them, is that by launching these probes and beginning to move and exploring, you're actually modifying the dynamics of the entire system, right? You put a probe, the system answers back, right? And you're modifying the dynamics so that sometimes problems are not problems anymore.
Yeah, what I found fascinating about learning all this is how similar it is to me to the scientific method that a lot of us were all taught in school, right? And the thing I think that was missing as part of all of our education is it was taught in such an abstract way. And I think a lot of us grew up thinking, okay, well, that's something scientists do, when in reality, it's really simple things that we can apply to real life, as you're suggesting, right?
Absolutely. Now, here's a really cool feedback, right? Because I actually started from the scientific method, okay? I mean, literally, I looked at the scientific method, studied every step, because I have a background in entrepreneurship, lean startup, and we talked a lot about, and because I burned $15 million, going in a very lean and agile way in the wrong direction, it really stuck with me that maybe all my, ideas were assumptions that I would have to somewhat validate, right, in some way. So this idea of experimentation led to me to study more, go deeper. It turns out, though, that if you call that a scientific method, I mean, it's loosely based on that. But what I just said was, PopcornFlow principle number 2 or 3, I can't remember, I keep moving there. The one that essentially says everybody's entitled to their own opinion, but a shared opinion is a fact, okay? Now, that's an opinionated opinion, right? It's not a fact. And so I was reading actually yesterday about like a professor, like he works in complexity and comes from biology, and essentially is about social evolution. One thing you kind of realize is that there are sometimes things that are wrong literally and true metaphorically. Obviously, a shared opinion is not a fact, okay? But the thing is, I want to move forward, right? And so we'll treat it as a fact until we know that it's not. If I say the code sucks, I don't have to prove it. And when I run an experiment, as long as you agree, right? So that's all I have to do, right? Now, there's an ethical aspect, when you think about, okay, so we're using opinions. These are not facts. So I'm not going there like to say, you can spread deliberately fake news and stuff like that. So there's an ethical aspect about that. But the thing is, like, if I believe something, then I want to share this opinion. And if everybody else shares it, fine, we move forward. But we systematically validate, right, our assumptions, because rather than say these are facts, as we sometimes do in big data, for example, right, we have lots of data that is already biased. We consider that the truth, and that's actually way more dangerous in my case when where there are facts that turns out they're not facts, and so in here, what I'm saying is, well, I know they're not facts; they're shared opinions, but we begin to explore. We find out, we adjust, and sometimes we're wrong, sometimes we're really wrong, right? So it's not scientific in that sense. And I talked to different scientists as well. You have the ones who actually say, oh, but an experiment needs to be isolated and repeatable. This is the opposite of what I try to do, which is, if we agree on a problem, we may disagree on options, let's launch them in parallel. Who cares if they're dirty, okay? So It kind of feels like a scientific, but actually, honestly, it's not, because there are limits anyways. Complexity experts know that there are limits actually to the scientific method. If we've been victim from the success actually of the last few centuries of the scientific method, and now biology is actually an interesting direction to study in, because things don't act in a way, organic matter doesn't act like Newtonian physics, right? It's not all cause and effect.
Well, and this is an interesting evolution that I would say, right? Because where could you take an entire organization, an entire business culture, and put it in isolation and run experiments on it, true to the actual scientific method? You just can't, right? So the best you can do this way is, right, treat beliefs and opinions as sort of hypotheses, right, and test them and probe them and validate them.
And once again, when I do experiments, is not to prove an hypothesis, to validate it, as we would say in Lean Startup, because I'm not using the scientific method card. It would be easy. I'm not. It's more like to say, I run experiments to explore an option. Okay, I just want to explore it in the knowledge that if we try it with a different team or even the same team 3 months later, it may not work. But it works even the opposite, right? Something that didn't work 3 months before may work now, right. Because everything is on the move. So it's really being a skateboarder or a surfer of reality, right? You have this kind of reality, which is like the ocean, and I'm surfing through the waves rather than expecting, I'm validating this, I'm proving this. I'm just not annoyed, but I'm just careful on not calling it scientific. We are running experiments, but they're not. Let's be honest about that.
I get it, and I agree with you, right? Because I'm going to say about 6 to 9 months ago, I floated that language here in my organization. I tried to use that terminology, right? And it just totally died for the same reasons that you're saying, right? And I would agree with you in that the approach of trying to be a surfer or a skateboarder is much easier, because it is so difficult to fight resistance head on. It's
more, it's humble as well, right? It's humble, right? Rather than say, I know it all, it's more like, I see the world in this way. Let me give you some ideas around this. And then, how about we try it? Very often when I talk about PopcornFlow, literally, when I do a workshop, for example, the workshop in itself is an experiment where I have some expectations on the number of experiments we do. I expect we laugh and whatever. But then, like, to actually introduce it, then, we say, well, so how can we move forward? Here's an experiment. Maybe you could try it for a few weeks. Just consistency of actually trying it, but give a time limit can actually help. And it's, I think the nice thing about an experiment is that you begin to show that you may fail. And I also say that, 40% of my experiments fail. Now, I run experiments all the time. And they fail to meet my expectation. But the thing is, like, if they don't, I actually question if the experiment if I was daring enough. Was I actually trying enough? Was something I was pushing the envelope or not? They have to be safe to fail. That's the thing.
Yeah, and that's an interesting part of it, too, where I think it's fair to say in a lot of business culture, that's sort of not accepted by default, right?
Right.
And then yet, when you look at all of the fascinating things we have in modern society, they actually came from people trying and trying and trying and failing and failing and failing until they figured it out and got things right.
True. However, the thing is, though, if you look at humanity, like in general, right? You have like the entrepreneurs who Nasser Taleb actually considers the heroes. Essentially, they are, they are the painful victims of this try and search and whatever for the better good of society, right? You don't want to be the one who fails, though. That's the problem, right? Sure. And so, like in many, many ways, the thing is, like, when you say failure is not an option, it's the big failure, it's the one that costs a lot. But other than that, it's all about, if you stay still, you're probably going back, and because everything else is on the move. And so it's to learn this kind of really small changes and having this kind of, I actually loved the kind of idea of warfare, right, that you were talking about, of introducing this kind of hacks. And this, what I just talked about is related to that. I used to call it stealth, right? Use PopcornFlow, use stealth. But another hack is this one, right? buy options, we trade options. This is what you do actually on masterminds. And but we do that as team level as well. Like if you go to a team and you actually say, well, if they know PopcornFlow now, they don't have to explain it to everybody else just yet. But sure enough, we have experiments where they say, oh, you know what, in the cafeteria or where we eat, actually, when we dine, we have a blackboard. And so there are pictures pretty much where they show their problems. We have these problems. Do you have any options for us? And you know what I mean? These are little ways to introduce that kind of mindset and mechanism. And you could launch tons of these kind of little experiments in your organization without risking anything. Now, I've been in other places where I didn't understand the cost of the experiment, where I was called maybe for a keynote. Actually, it happened recently. Mark knows, right? I was, recently it was this bank, and I was asked to do a keynote. It took forever to take that decision. They're introducing Agile. They had some pilots working, and we were talking about doing a keynote and then perhaps like a workshop to follow up. We didn't do the workshop, but the important thing was they said, oh, PopcornFlow, can you keep it low key? I said, you don't understand why did you call me in the first place? They wanted the wow factor, all that kind of stuff. But the thing was, my mission is to bring PopcornFlow to the planet. I mean, I'm an activist by invention. It's through people like you that I introduced PopcornFlow. This is why we're here today, okay? And so, of course, I didn't agree. But one thing is we talked about the story about my son. They loved it, right? So at the end of that, the buy-in was amazing. Net promoter score was 10, pretty much all the time. But the point there was, it happened that they didn't want to do the workshop because the IT manager who actually called me was not the most important person in that room that day. It was full of managers, headquarter from France and whatever. So the big boss would come in, and they were saying, if you actually launch experiments right now, because I don't do simulations, I don't care about simulations. We do the real thing. And so you imagine, right? You launch a workshop, and then you have suddenly people committed to launch experiments on Monday. This is what you want to do, right? It's a bunch of people who have a behavior, they talk about and address problems right then. But doing the right thing there was extremely risky. Why? Because there was another who was the head of the innovation who apparently would see that as a threat. Then you would have the agile guys who actually, they loved everything. They loved it, of course, but there was the head of the lean transition, of the lean initiative, who essentially let them to do their agile thing as long as it wouldn't interfere with his own turf. You know what I mean? So you have all this kind of, and then you have the other. So this is what I'm talking about when you talk about PopcornFlow stealth, right? In those kind of organizations, in the end, what we decided was, they'll call me back. We'll do PopcornFlow real with the ones with the IT group. Essentially, we'll start with them, right? But essentially, why? Because if the sponsor is across the room, then there's no problem. If the sponsor is not ultimately, at the same level of the ones who actually call me, then, me or whoever introduces a new system, you need to be very careful, because that system will interfere potentially with other initiatives, with other programs that they have, and so on, right? But if it's the sponsor, then I use PopcornFlow to accelerate whatever initiatives they have. But they don't know yet. They don't see that yet, right? Because they didn't have time to, and so they see that as a threat. So that's kind of political awareness, kind of gives you an insight on the idea of sometimes experiments that we think are safe are not so safe. And so you need to get feedback and actually look at either different ways or different times or different groups or different ways of action. So, the options I gave you today are just some of the options I tried because it just happened, but I'm sure there are tons of others.
Right. Thanks, Claudio. I've got Mark that wanted to say something, and then Johan, who also had himself unmuted for a while. So, Mark.
Well, firstly, thank you, Claudio, for joining us. It's always fascinating to hear you talk. All of us are struggling with that challenge of we apply Kanban and Agile practices in IT, and we move forward. And at some stage, we start getting a little bit slower because the rest of the organization is not really there. So PopcornFlow Stealth was really, like, I believe, the next step and really to change everything. Now, one thing that well,
it's one option.
I'd say. Well, I believe that is a very good option. And yeah, now you're applying the principles and it makes a lot of sense, but how do you transition over into more sort of a habitual, continuous improvement change cycle? Because obviously, I mean, if you just use it, it's going to be
yeah. So
you know, what is the mechanism and the routine behind it when you?
So that's a really good question. So the first thing I would do is, if you already have them, right? I hack into the existing system. I love when there are agile teams because usually their retrospectives suck, and so we just try that, right? And they don't abandon it, because at the end of each retrospective they have new experiments, they review existing experiments. Essentially becomes an easy mechanism to actually to do this. Now it's a little bit more challenging when, and then you have meetings, you have different ways pretty much to do this. But the long-term success, you know, for example, the company I was talking about with Jason. So the mechanism, for example, like in this kind of one of the large US banks I've been working recently, there are several teams now that are using it. They love it. They're actually talking about that. They're sharing it with others. That's the thing, right? So you create communities of practice, like mechanisms, where you share your findings. So like a learning organization, all the ones I know and the ones I introduced as well, but essentially what they have fairly autonomous teams who are free to experiment, try new stuff. Maybe they don't call it experiment, they do try new stuff, but then they share their experience with others. And so that's how good technology spreads, you know, good methodology spread and whatever. So it's lateral. It's not necessarily top down, it's way lateral in that thing. But I guess so that's one, right? You need to create a habit of change. As managers, that's the goal, right? Is to become a sustaining. So you start with this kind of coaching kind of approach and you expand, right? So if you can coach using PopcornFlow, for example, you coach people into working that way, then you show the method, you work together on that and whatever, then you create other coaches internally. So the creating internal coaches should always be a goal for an external coach, first of all, right? That's my goal when I come into it, is to create other coaches, but internal. And as a manager, that's what you want to do, is you want to carve yourself out of the job, right? Because the job is to support, is not to get the report. I remember ages ago, a good friend of mine works for one of those top consultancy companies, top well-known consultancy companies, huge. And he would say, you know what, every year my manager would call us into his room and say, this year, these are my goals. What can you do for me? You know, which is awesome. You know, by quarterly or whatever goal, what can you do for me? And, you know, I met somebody in Toyota who actually became a manager and said, I have 500 people under me. And the sensei said, well, you serve 500 people. So it's that kind of serving kind of mentality rather than reporting, it's supporting organization. And so because of that, your job is to facilitate those meetings. They either happen or they don't happen. If they don't happen, they need help, right? So create those mechanisms, offer them and create those mechanisms, help them essentially do them. Of course, if you say we all need to learn, but then you don't give them time for reflection, they'll never do that. You know, it won't happen unless they really believe in what they're doing it. You know what I mean? So there is an idea of understanding, again, it's not only what you do, but what you learn by doing it that matters. And so it's your responsibility to create those conditions. So how do you do that? Put it in a calendar. You know, as simple as that. Just put it in the calendar. If it's in the calendar, it happens. Now, maybe you can help them to have.
Do you perhaps have an idea as to sort of a good starting rhythm, every 2 weeks, every 4 weeks?
Personally, I mean, it really depends on the domain because some teams, they already have some cadences, and so they do it in that way. If you're, for example, in an enterprise transition community, you know, it could happen every 3 weeks, but typically I do it every week. Me is a weekly cadence, and the reason is problems build up. I don't want to do that. I actually want fast feedback. I mean, experiments may last just a few hours, some days. I mean, what I mean to last means that you aren't actually working on those like full day, but it's more like, when will I have some information, or how fast can I have some information? And so a lot of experiments would be, I would be able to review them either within a week, within 2 weeks, sometimes 3, but roughly this is my thing. And certainly I wouldn't go over 2 weeks. Again, they just accumulate. Think about the boards, right? You put in problems, and that board is taking a lot of precious estate, right? I keep all the experiments that are done, but I usually throw away a lot of problems, options, and all that, because they come and go. They're like mozzarellas. I'm Italian, right? There's a kind of an expiry date there. After a while, you don't care. You want to clean them up. And if there are again problems, you just resume them. Now, if you go through the board, you will see that, you know, say you do the mastermind experiment. It's just an example, just to say how practical this can be, right, in everyday conversations. Or even the family one. Let's say the family one. You do the family one, you know, something new to cook. I'm eager to try that, actually. And so we do that, and then you reflect on that, and you say, well, you know, was it good and whatever? Would you want to try maybe another dish, or you want to, maybe you try it, or maybe I can help you. You know, you can do different things, and that would be, you do the review, then you think about the next step, which is, I can repeat the experiment. I can adopt it. It's a status quo. Every 2 weeks, I do a new dish for whatever. Or it could be, excuse me, or it could be, I don't know, maybe we rotate, maybe, I don't know, whatever that is, right? But so the mechanism is still there. I don't have to keep the problem is I'd like to cook something, you know, every week. It's still there, right? It's in the cycle. Now, you may just archive it and then forget about it, talk about other problems and whatever. Same for the mastermind, right? You may or may not have a cadence. You happen to have a cadence, right? But you may actually say, let's try it once, maybe twice, but let's try it once. And at the end of that, we'll do the review the day after, the session after. You know, did you actually explore one of those options? I mean, let's be honest, we never do that, right? Do we? Like sometimes actually Matthias do asks, but generally wise, you know, we want to be not too oppressive, I guess. You know, the current hot seats are the star of the moment, right? So we focus on them, but we actually forget that, you know, there were options hanging around the way before. And maybe we did some experiments, maybe we didn't. But if we did, if we actually acted using PopcornFlow, well, there are experiments running, and there is a review date on those experiments. And the first thing you would do is to review those experiments. Now, on PopcornFlow, there's a set of questions. One is, what experiments did we agree to do? Which ones did we actually do? Right? Because there is a gap between what we think we could do and what we actually do. So let's be honest. You may say, I didn't do it, you know, for whatever reason, but maybe you will do, or we rethink about, you know, either the problem or do the experiments after. And so it creates that kind of mechanism where there is a sort of accountability. It's not forced, of course, right? But there is an accountability. And so I've been into multi-week kind of cycles where actually it's exactly that form of peer accountability that makes the thing work, you know, because otherwise it's a waste of time.
Awesome. Thanks, Claudio. We are already out of time, but I want to give, I see Johan and Robert had questions, but we might need to answer them a bit quicker, but I want to give it another 10 minutes or so because it looks like everybody's having fun. So, Johan.
Yes, I think my question sort of adds on to Mark's Mark's question in terms of continuous improvement. Now, just a little bit of context is we're an engineering company, so we obviously have a model here called the Deming cycle: plan, do, check, act. So obviously, my question is in terms of PopcornFlow, how does one integrate that with the current Deming cycle? Or do you replace it in total, or do you just start using the lingo in order to support it and make it more effective in terms of continuous improvement?
Okay, awesome question. So before PopcornFlow, I was actually known because I created a tool that, like a Toyota tool, A3 Thinking. I didn't invent the methodology, right? It's based on PDCA. This is how in Toyota they use PDCA actually internally, to tell the story of a problem and share with everybody else. I'm actually known in the community because, I did a lot of work essentially to spread it in our Agile community in the first place. I also built tools that I ended up selling to Toyota itself, right? So I sold ice cream to the Eskimo. So I totally know what you're talking about, right? PDCA. Now, there's a difference. They're similar, but they're different. So I consider this, right? PDCA is the tortoise. The tortoise, in fact, they call it the lean tortoise, the Toyota tortoise. You go slow to go fast, right? It's systematic and relentless. That's continuous improvement. It's based on analysis. You said it. It's an engineering company. An engine breaks down. I open it up, look for the root cause, and I do fix it. And now I have my engine and airplane back, okay? What I'm talking about, though, with PopcornFlow is more, there is that, and there is the organic matter. So that part, the quality part, is engineering, is technical. You use analysis. If your site goes down, you better do root cause analysis. You don't kind of explore like randomly, right? You do root cause analysis to actually find, and so you use the PDCA cycle. PDCA cycle, though, is planning, right? There's a lot of planning. Half of the cycle is planning, right? When you do PDCA, you take your time. You go slow to go fast. Now, if you remember, the tortoise and the hare. Do you remember that story? The tortoise, the hare loses the race because, they're boasting and blah, blah, blah. PopcornFlow is the hare, but it's a smarter hare. It's a hare that actually lost the first race, right? Because became, whatever. Goes back to the tortoise and says, I learned my lesson. Can we have a rematch? So PDCA is the engineering, and the hare, the smarter hare, the one that actually does two moves from one that you make, right, is more about, here I'm aiming for perfection and quality and trying to be right. Yes, I'm doing longer experiments, but I'm trying to really reach perfection. Here is actually to say, I'm not as smart, I'm stupid, but I'm exploring really fast. So if I'm wrong, that's fine. I will find quickly and redirect myself. So it's important to understand in what domain you're operating. So if it's a complicated domain, which is where Toyota essentially thrives, PDCA, I don't think is all you need because you still have people, right? But do understand that if it's a purely technical problem, then PDCA is the right thing. If it involves people and decisions and whatever, you may start with PopcornFlow. One of the options is to do actual analysis, okay? So I use PDCA, I use essentially is OODA, if you're familiar with that, is Boyd's cycle. Observe, orient, essentially is jet airplane pilots, pretty much. They orient really quickly to, to spot the enemy. So it's something that works better in a more complex, okay? Now the OODA has got a lot of lingo, like in many ways, where PopcornFlow, my goal was to teach it to my son, and he was 5. You will actually search on YouTube, you will find him explaining PopcornFlow level 1, right? And, talking about options, so that's kind of the way I kind of look at it. So you need both. It's not versus, it's and. I actually have some slides somewhere when I talk. And so I don't talk about continuous improvement. I talk about continuous change, with the idea that we can be wrong, but we will convert. One is easier, faster, better, cheaper, roughly in that order. And if I remember Shingo, right? Here is different, evolve and disrupt. One is the investigator. I investigate a process, I observe, and investigate. The other one is the surfer, right? One is systems thinking. This is complexity thinking. So again, they're both cycles in a way. You may decide they're both decision cycles in a way or the other. One is more in the quality sort of realm. This is more in the decision-making realm. There's the University of Arkansas who is actually using my tools these days. I actually happen to know the guy who is, this is a business school. They have ties with West Point. And essentially started with A3 thinking, and because he's a lean, guy, but he's actually now bringing the leaders into PopcornFlow. So he's doing both effectively. With the quality team, he's doing PDCA. With everybody else now is starting with PopcornFlow, which is interesting. I'm looking forward to see what.
No, that's my specific question. I mean, obviously, in terms of the innovation and making the environment better and coming up with new ideas, the guys are still referring to the PDCA cycle, where I see that's more to existing processes, engineering, making sure the quality improves on the existing stuff.
Let me explain that to you, right? Yeah. So with PDCA, you use analysis. Analysis for me is I either have all the variables or I can find them. Right? So if I spend enough time and I have enough engineering knowledge, experience, that's the expert domain. I will use my expertise and actually find. I'm Italian. I'm actually from Genoa. You remember that bridge? I don't know if it came, the bridge collapsed. You do root cause analysis, right? You do an investigation. That's the way you do it. Now, having said that, very often you are not in control of all the variables. For example, when we talk about innovation, I don't know how customers will react. I just don't know. I can analyze all day long, but their reaction, I don't know. And when you introduce change in your organization, you're the same. You can plan all day long. There are very old style change management, linear planning. You do this, then that, then that. But it's not so linear. You don't know what the reaction of people is. It's a territory of extreme uncertainty as much as any startup faces the outside world, okay? So of course, there are really bad ways to introduce change, right? So people really talk about a lot of resistance. Very often is because they're not introducing it in a way that would make sense. And, but on the other hand, I can't predict, I can say some may resist, but it's more about reaction and I can't predict it. When you understand that effectively, again, to be quick, my son, for example, is Asperger, right? Needs to be in control of everything. Perfect project manager, right? Now, to know why, now his brain is wired differently. He's super intelligent, but his brain is wired different. Now I have to deal with that, and his power, whatever. But the thing is, even knowing the cause for that is probably not going to help me at all. Right? So you don't do the code. There's a million scientists are trying to find out and blah, blah, blah. You're still dealing with an environment that you don't quite understand, right? And that's the point, is really to understand we're not in control of reality. There are certain areas where we have certainty or we can find out more because it's mechanical. We use PDCA. But innovation and change probably is not one of those.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. And we can definitely take that discussion further. I just want to give Rob another, as I said, another 2 minutes. We've got from my time that's over. Rob, you had a question for us.
I talk too much, sorry.
Rob, you're still muted, so yeah, there you go.
Yeah, no, it was on the similar lines as Johan.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. No, then let's take that discussion offline or online, actually, into the Xuviate network, if we've got questions there or if there's any additional work. But I think we then need to slowly but surely wrap up. And Claudio, you know my question. I always ask if there was one highlight or takeaway point that you want people to have, especially people who weren't here today, but maybe also those that were here. In about 2-3 sentences, what would you say that should be?
Oh, actually, I knew it was coming. I didn't prepare it at all. I think the thing is to try something as a little experiment. Evaluate, if it's expensive to do that, but if it's sufficiently safe, just do one little step just to try. You may look at some of the existing experiments I proposed. You can look into, again, you know, at work or with your family, but just try something. In the end, what do you have to lose? That's all I say all the time. Try something. What do you have to lose? We agree on the problem. We may disagree on the option. How about we explore this one? What do you have to lose?
Great. Thanks very much, Claudio. And that was awesome. And I can definitely see a lot of thinking behind that. And I can see a lot of more discussion coming up in the Xuviate network. Everybody knows that you're quite active. So
yeah, you know, I just want to say it's awesome to see this network kind of growing. You know, we were like kind of in isolated mastermind groups and whatever, and to see this really like bubbling up, like it's awesome. I'm really honored to be part of this group, and I hope our conversations will continue. By the way, I'm a consultant. Sooner or later, you will call me.
Great. Yeah, thanks for that little bit of advertisement, and you got it in, Claudio, no problem. But thanks very much for sharing your insights here. And you can see, I mean, I looked at this and everybody was attentively looking at their screen throughout, and we are quite over time and everybody was really there. So thanks very much also to everybody for allowing us to go over a bit. And I think let's conclude this session, and it is then again a very good morning, a very good day, and a very good night to all of you, wherever and whenever from the globe you are going to watch this. Thank you and goodbye.